Greetings, friends. Thank you for joining us. This is Will with Perpetual Assets, and I am very thrilled to have my old friend and guest back on the line, Dr. Jim Willie. He's the editor of the Hat Trick Letter, which is found on the website goldenjackass.com. He's a wealth of knowledge. Jim, so happy to have you back, buddy. How you been?
Been hanging in there, enjoying the rainy season here. May and early June, it starts pretty heavy rain every afternoon, but lately it's been okay. Some nice weather, but hanging in there. We've got a number of things going on that I think are extremely important. We've got a festering zone with Deutsche Bank in Italy, and we've got an embryonic hot zone with Shanghai, and I'd like to start off, if I could, with a conversation that I had with The Voice recently, where he indicated in vague terms, he said, all I can do is express to you in vague terms that there are going to be two extremely important events, not in the next couple of years and not in the next 12 months, but in the next few months. I mean, he's saying this is not a late 2019 event. He said in the next few months, we got two very significant events that are going to unleash gold and silver. And I tried to guess, and I'd like to cover the two events that I think that are going to be these significant pair. Because he said, I cannot give you details, and we went on to discuss why he can't. I don't even want to get into that. But there are two events, Will, that are extremely important and going to force some chaos. Chaos in the first and disruption in the second. Creative disruption in the second. The first is that Deutsche Bank is dying. You could read the news, check out the Barron's, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, all the promoted rags from the cabal boys. And you might say, well, Deutsche Bank is hanging on and they're still under control and they're a viable bank. Well, that's not the case. They're dying. I was told 2 years ago that there was a great effort to save Deutsche Bank 2 years ago. And the big issue was, what is their viable business? If there's a restructure of Deutsche Bank, what can be saved? And in the last year, they concluded nothing. It's all ruined. Every one of their business segments is ruined. Their stock is about to go below 10, if not already. And when it does, it's going to have some very significant declines. And The Voice said, expect it to go to 50 cents. So there's a good short. And I don't even want to get into the discussion of how do I make money on it. There's an opportunity there for the experts who know how to do it. Okay, it's not just shorting the stock. There are other things you can do. You can short the stock and just stay clear of margin debt. Stay clear.
Buy some puts, buy some puts.
No, well, that's leverage, and you might get screwed on that. If you buy puts and you've got, till September, you might lose because it might go down in October.
Yeah,
they might hang on.
Exactly. The time could eat you up. So don't buy more than you can lose.
They might have some Euro central bank rescues and you lose all your money in the put. So be very careful. But it's going down. It's going to die. And I have very big doubts on how they can create a viable nucleus of a company out of the ashes. It's just too big a mess. You look at any one of their 7 businesses segments, and they're all a mess.
Do you have any idea the size of the counterparty exposure there? I mean, if they go down and need a bailout and don't get one, or our assets are restructured, any idea what kind of claim we're talking about there? I mean, I know that their derivative book, what is it, the largest? Their derivative book alone, what does that look like? How the hell do you even unwind that?
Well, BaFin, the German equivalent of both the FDIC and the Securities and Exchange Commission, BaFin got a look at their book about 2 years ago, and as Rob Kirby put, they shit their pants. So there's been a concerted, coordinated what's the word, initiative to reduce the derivative book. And I hear it's down to something like 48, 50 trillion. And it used to be 75 to 80 trillion. Okay, they're making an effort, but this is not something that you can actually salvage. What number? I have no idea. Okay, if you're looking at a legitimate commercial credit office and business segment, my guess is it's probably $1 trillion underwater, if you look at all the reality. These are very big numbers. If you want to rescue their derivative book, which was assumed by a forced acquisition of Bankers Trust, I don't think 20 trillion would get the job done. Okay, I hear people say, well, it looks like the EU is going to have to do a TARP of their own, like the 700 billion that Wall Street stole back in 2008. And I said, yeah, this time it might need to be 2 trillion euros that the bankers can steal, and that the various parliaments can produce through deficit spending and funding in order to, say, revitalize their economy, but the bankers will steal. Okay, I don't have any sharp figures, but what I do know is that Deutsche Bank has been working vigorously with the Euro Central Bank to reduce their exposure to Italian debt. I mean both government and private banker debt, private bank system debt. The banking system in Italy is down 350 billion euros in non-performing loans. And the Italian government debt is right around 1 trillion euros. It's all in trouble, and I think that they're having bank runs now in Italy. They're trying to keep it out of the news. But we cannot save the Italian system, and there's another reason why it cannot be saved. Its gold was lost by Jim Rickards at Long-Term Capital Management in 1998. The central bank gold for Italy was lost by LTCM under the guiding hand of Jim Rickards. And if you think he's an expert at things, well, yeah, he's an expert at making money, writing about things that avoid his criminal activities.
Careful, Jim. We might get cut off again.
You can't write a book about what really happened with LTCM and the Bank of Italy with their gold back in 98. You can't write a book on that. Okay, here's one of the zingers. Who was the finance minister in 98 in Italy? Mario Draghi.
Draghi, you got me.
So the Euro Central Bank started off with the French, Jean-Claude Trichet, and it followed up with Mario Draghi to complete the cover-up. Okay, in addition to that, Italy, Spain, and a couple of other countries never qualified for the European Union under the Maastricht rules. Goldman Sachs was on the scene to falsify their debt and make it look like currency swaps. Okay, now this is all going to come undone. Both Deutsche Bank, I did not say the German banking system, I said Deutsche Bank. Deutsche Bank and the Italian government debt system and their private banking system are going to go down together and take with them the French banking system. Now, when you look at the news and you gather all the data about what's going on in Italy and Euro Central Bank involvement and Deutsche Bank involvement, what's usually left out is the amount of debt exposure that French banks have to Italy. It is 4 times what the German banks have in exposure to Italy. So when Deutsche Bank and Italy go down, France's banking system will probably see its 2 leading banks go kaput. And those are Societe Generale and BNP, Banco National Paris, BNP Paribas. Wow. Okay, so that could release the gold price. That's my point. All right, there's more. There's more. That's like a banking reality factor. Now let's get to financial structure reality. And I think there's an enormous disruption coming. I believe the second trigger event is going to be the launch of the gold trade note by Shanghai. and the Chinese government oversight. The gold trade note could, in fact, serve as a replacement for U.S. Treasury bills in commercial trade payments, starting with oil but not ending in oil. Start with oil and move on to grain payments, soybean payments, cement, lumber, commodities, iron ore payments. The Chinese are working, I think, on a gold and iron standard. Now, that might sound funny to say, they're trying to link their currency with gold and iron. It's very interesting what's going on. Now, if the Chinese sponsor a gold trade note, it would be for putting forward gold as equity, gold bullion bars as equity, like 5% put forward, to guarantee the payment like of an oil shipment for, say, Arab oil, the Saudis, not just the Saudis, but UAE and Kuwait and Oman and Qatar. Qatar is already buying and selling energy to China and taking RMB payment. Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, and the disruption could be many-fold greater. The Chinese might announce at the same time a pre-announcement that in the future, like 2020, gold will back the RMB, and the short-term Chinese government bill, not the bond, the bill, will be the gold trade note. In other words, the gold trade note would use the Chinese RMB as a caretaker, and that would get the job done for global trade payments to be diverted toward the gold vehicles, the instruments. Now, China and Russia are already using this method. It's not in the form of a structured gold trade note, however. The Chinese are handing over RMB to Russia for Russian oil, and ironically, the oil pipelines were built with U.S. Treasury bonds, paid for by U.S. Treasury bonds held in reserve by the Chinese government. So, we facilitated the construction of their pipelines. The Chinese pay in RMB to Russia. Russia takes the RMB, goes over to Shanghai, uses the gold oil contract, converts to gold, and uses their Sverbank, S-V-E-R, Sverbank office in Beijing to take the gold.
Essentially creating a petro yuan.
Well, not just a petro yuan, but a
gold link.
Petro yuan.
Yeah, with a gold link. Interesting.
Okay, a petro yuan that operates on a gold table. Okay, so this is very rich and very ripe, and I'm thinking the Chinese are going to tell the Gulf Arabs they don't need to force anything with Iran. Iran will comply with whatever is good for the Eurasian trade zone and whatever screws up the dollar, because we're really messing up Iran's lifestyle and economy and banking system with these sanctions, and I think they're truly insane. All right, so the two events are Deutsche Bank Italy with France in the contagion zone, operating in concert with the gold trade note and maybe a gold-backed RMB that uses the gold trade note as their short-term bill. If those two events occur, I guarantee you gold will respond. This is not a function of commitment of traders and the large spec versus big commercial. I mean, pardon me. As well and good as they are, I don't think they're at the critical mass for this issue of releasing gold. But I will say this regarding the corruption in the paper gold market. The exchange for physical concept that has been introduced a few months ago in London has so totally falsified the delivery process and so radically exposed the corruption in the form of, oh my gosh, look at that. The volume for exchange for physical at the LBMA is like, wow, it's like 5 times the annual gold mine output. In other words, it's all false.
Yeah, they can't hide it anymore. It's blatant at this point.
right in front of our faces. EFP, Exchange for Physical in London, has so thoroughly corrupted the market for gold in like strangling it with a paper noose that all legitimate activity is going to Shanghai. And the launch of the gold trade note will just be like the christening of this whole process. We do have a tremendous increase in volume with the Shanghai gold. And pretty soon, I think we're going to see the Shanghai Petro Yuan, the oil RMB contract. I think we're going to see it surpass the Brent volume. And then even the Wall Street knuckleheads who are paid to be wrong, who are paid to do a professional economic and financial job, to be wrong, as marketing agents and not not economists or bank analysts. They're marketing agents. I think even they are going to have to wake up and say, this is real. As you say, Will, the shit is getting real. So those are the two big events, and I could go on for 2 hours on many of the details, but let it be known that Italian bank runs are happening. Cocoa bonds are losing. Suicides are continuing for those investors who believe their brokers in thinking that a banker corporate bond cannot lose value. And I just had a friend, a personal friend, come back from a week in Italy. He was in Rome, he was in Venice, and he was elsewhere. And he said, Jim, the place is just gorgeous. Gorgeous, beautiful. And I had, several questions for him about, conditions and, did he see the lira on any receipts? He said, yep, they're on a lot of receipts, but that's been the case for years. He was there about 3 years ago, Spain and Italy. And he said, I did not see any problems from roaming gangs of Arab youth. Nothing. Because I've got a couple clients who tell me it's getting bad there. But my buddy said, nope, didn't see any of that. I was in Rome. I was in Venice. We did a quick jaunt through, I think he said Florence. But anyway, there's a lot going on, Will, and there's a lot breaking down the damn walls. I don't mean that like damnation. I mean like damn holding back water. There's a lot of imminent damage coming from imminent crisis that I call the imminent systemic Lehman events. It's not one event. It's going to be a group of events. We had 2008, and by the way, in 2007, I was forecasting the death of Lehman and the death of Fannie Mae. I was talking about how it's going to wreck the housing market. By the way, now on a certain measure of housing market prices as a multiple of median income, we're now at a higher, more extreme level of silliness in the U.S. housing market than we were in 2007. So once again, rinse and repeat, American style. Fix nothing.
It's quite unbelievable. I mean, it really is. The metrics are show. The data is there. It's like the gas pedal has been slammed. Mere years ago, handful of years ago, trading oil for euros would get you invaded, or doing anything with gold backing a currency would get you invaded.
And now it just gets you sanctions.
Yeah, no, it just gets you sanctions while it's just accelerating on a massive pace. I mean, this is why it's so important for us to listen to Jim and the work that he puts together. Like he said, he forecasted Lehman and the Fannie Mae crisis in the days and weeks and months leading up to it.
I did not forecast the fall of AIG. I got Fannie and I got Lehman right. And the voice asked me once, Jim, there are going to be 3 that die. And he asked me this in August of 2008. And I got the 2, and he said, the other one's insurance. I said, I just don't know. And he said, I'm not going to give you any hints. You'll just have to watch. And later he said, you didn't realize it. When I said insurance, I meant derivatives insurance.
Yep. Those good old, what was it, interest rate swaps. Well, 2 out of 3 ain't bad, as the song goes, Jim.
Well, the voice said he asked 20 people, and not a single person got 1 out of the 3. I got 2 out of the 3. So I think I'm in pretty good, as my dad would say, rarefied company.
Yeah, you're really good at assessing risk in these markets and watching what is being built, what infrastructure is being put in place, and by whom, and how it all ties together. And so this is, for those of us paying attention, things are getting rocky. They have been for some time, and now it appears it's accelerating. The attempts by the deep state controllers, whether they be orchestrated attacks, whether they be actual human related attacks or financial related attacks, are accelerating. News is accelerating. Exposure is accelerating. Jim and I'm still, was a little rattled here for the beginning of our call because we recorded a great 30-minute segment when we started, and we had a recording error that it was recording just fine, and then something popped up, and anyway, we lost all that 30 minutes, and we were talking about things that, anyway, we'll keep it a little more financial, we agreed, in this latter part of the rest of the interview. It sounds like you had a similar experience with another interviewer not long ago. Same kind of thing, a recording error. It just didn't, issue with my recording software out of nowhere. Anyway.
Well, let me just make sure that we introduce something that is controversial. I'd like to explain why Russia is opposed by the U.S. and, the Rothschild and Rockefeller gang, the cabal, the deep state. Why is Russia so out of favor? Well, I'll tell you why. It has 2 important parts. The first is that I'm going to go reverse chronological. About 20 years ago, the Western cabal, led by their oil executives like Royal Dutch and Exxon and all them, Royal Dutch Shell, they tried to install a fellow named Yeltsin as president so that the West could control the Russian resources. And Putin stepped in and said, not on my watch. You're not going to have a Western banker cabal stooge named Yeltsin operate the Kremlin. Not going to happen. So they ousted them and arrested a bunch of oligarchs. The oligarchs were all in league with the Rothschilds. And the next thing Putin did was to try to clean up. He did not do a perfect job. It's very hard to do. He tried to clean up and remove the Rothschilds from their central bank. And he was partially successful. And it angered to no end the Rothschilds. I could go on and on with this, but let me just leave that. That's a surface description of why Putin and Russia is out of favor. They removed the attempted connection to control Russia and its resources, both commodity resources and financial resources. Step back a long time ago, the formation of the Russian Soviet system. Who was the wealthiest man on earth in 1905?
No idea.
Tsar Nicholas Romanov. So his brother, King George of England, decided to kill him and steal his gold and take the bulk of it and move it to New York and start the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve's foundation gold is stolen Russian gold. Do you see why the Rothschilds want to keep Russia at bay?
Because they know the playbook, it appears.
It's not just the modern last 20 years with Yeltsin and kicking out the bankers in the central bank. It's Russia wants its gold back and wants to tell the story. And we don't even want to give them FaceTime. Let's just block them. Let's call them aggressive. Let's surround Russia with NATO missiles. Let's blame it on Russian aggression, when instead it's NATO alliance violation by the United States.
Yeah, what, 20, 30 years ago it was the Cold War, and now it's, election tampering to get Trump in office. I mean, it's very obvious, the deep state tactics, and that, Trump is an agent of the good guys that I mean, when the pop culture response to the current president in this country versus Obama. I mean, I lived in when Obama was president and was reelected. I at the time I lived in a very conservative town in Texas, and but people held it together. People didn't set things on fire, and they might have said a cuss word or two in close company about the current SOB running the show, but they didn't freaking cry and whine about it or take their guns and go shoot a bunch of shit. This response on the pop culture, the liberal scene, the media scene, the Hollywood scene, it's like, damn, this guy just came in and really ruffled a bunch of feathers. Why? Because he talked about grabbing a... No, I don't think so. Something else is going on here, people. Wake up. This is not about pussy grabbing. This is not about, the guy who just is a jerk or said some jerky things. He is the most powerful propaganda apparatus in the history of the friggin' world. Hates him and is trying to tell you in every outlet it has that he's evil and a dictator and he's going to kill us all. I mean, who is this idiot I sat next to on a plane flying back from a couple of months ago, talking about some book he was reading, and this, have you read so-and-so's book? Oh, no, what book? Where she's comparing him to Mussolini and the whole MAGA movement and all of them. I'm like, oh my God, some teacher from frickin' San Francisco. It's like, oh God, you people are... Jim, the epidemic is real, man. It's real. It's sick.
It's real, and it's really quite tragic, the decline in intellectual capability of people in our country. I give high applause, a lot of praise to people who are snapping out of it, realizing that our country is going in the wrong direction, realizing that we've been a war-based economy for 25 years, realizing that every foreign policy initiative since 9/11 and since the power grab by the neocon fascists, every single foreign policy initiative has been a grand failure. They're realizing that the economy is going very badly. There was a new shadow government statistics consumer price index graph that was made available to me just a couple weeks ago, and it shows that price inflation is over 8%, so that when we declare it as 2%, the error is 6%, so that if we say we've got 1.5% or 2% economic growth, we really have minus 4% recession. This is what I've been claiming has been the case now for 10 years or more. Ever since Lehman, the year before Lehman, we had a recognized year of recession. We've got a minus 3 to minus 5% recession every single year. I don't give a hoot about official statistics. I care about accurate inflation gauges, because that is how you take the nominal economic data, reduce it with the price inflation adjustment, and come up with an actual economic growth that's viable and defendable. And theirs is not.
Yeah, it's hocus pocus.
Pardon me?
It's hocus pocus. I mean, it's just been picking,
well, it's like a fascist law. You must call the economy in sluggish growth. You must call the economy with a tepid 2% inflation. But now you're starting to see price inflation pick up with food.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're going to have to tell the people, well, you've got these 20 items that are going up in price, but you've got a lot of other things that are pulling it down to make it just 2% overall. And they're going to say, like what?
Mm-hmm.
If you got your core items in food and your core items, even gasoline is going up in price again. And that's a long story. I don't want to get into it, but when the price of oil gets cut in half, you see a benefit in the gas pumps. Okay, but that's going away because Wall Street doesn't want that anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Wall Street wants to not to avoid wreckage of their gigantic losses in the energy portfolio that includes shale oil, which is just one of the biggest jokes in the history of the United States energy sector.
Mm-hmm.
Let's poison our water table. Let's ruin everything, and let's bring about instability to the entire geostructure so that we can have 3 years of energy or 5 years of energy production when energy is about to endure a gigantic quantum shift toward new energy systems where silver is at the center of just about everything.
So now this is a really interesting parallel. I love your work, and I have for years, Jim. And I love the way that your work. Not to toot your frickin' horn here, but dude, what's your current call, Jim, on predictions? What's your current number? Do you know for predictions that it's a lot. This guy over the last 2 decades has had asinine, crazy ass, backwards, nut job predictions, and 90% of them are true, and the rest are pending.
80 to 90%, and for the ones that seem like they're a little bit off, they just they haven't happened yet.
Haven't happened, exactly. So
like 2014 and 2015, I said Germany's going to flip east.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to become a major player of the Eurasian trade zone. They're going to resume commerce with Russia, and they're going to thumb the nose at Brussels. It's happening right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right now.
Some of these things take a while to actually occur, and then they take a while to unfold. The technology, new energy technology specifically with a silver role in it, is data that when I find any type of cross-pollination between your data and others out there that I respect their work, I know, hey, we're on to something here. And that's one of them. As a long-term silver investor, it's one that I've been kind of studying for a while, and I think there are a ton of incredible technologies, energy-related, healing-related, production-related that exist, and silver is they're intensively, silver's intensively used in it.
It has characteristics that are unique. It's not just uniqueness in reflecting light for photographic purposes. It's not just a fast conductor of electricity. It's much more than that.
Molecular,
It has molecular wavelength characteristics that mean it's going to be at the center of a lot of different energy systems. And I don't want to get into it now, but just take my word. If you can get your hands on some advanced physics research on energy systems, you'll find silver is in all of it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, here are just a couple of facts that reinforce the silver argument. J.P. Morgan is accumulating silver. I'm on the silver topic. J.P. Morgan is accumulating silver. In the last several months, they've got something like 130, 140 million ounces of silver in inventory. Now, I've been making the point for the last 2 years that something big is going on with J.P. Morgan, and I believe it has to do with 2 things. They see the future in the gold standard, which will permit the release of silver. If gold becomes unshackled, silver will gain 3 times as much on a percentage basis compared to gold.
Correct.
So if gold goes up 50%, silver's going to go up 150% and maybe triple.
Right.
Okay. So the first argument has to do with J.P. Morgan hanging on, hoarding a lot of silver.
Yeah, I'm looking up the number right here, Jim. It's something like Ted Butler's been on this thing like crazy. And this article back in January, more than 675 million ounces.
Okay, all right. I think it's now I think it's now maybe twice that.
Yeah, easily.
Okay, so I believe J.P. Morgan is not only serving their own interests in getting ready for the reset coming up that 90% of Americans have no clue on. And really, estate managers and fund managers, they should. It's their job. Okay, the second point is that I believe ever since J.P. Morgan lost its headquarters property to the Chinese, that they've been serving the Chinese as an agent to replace the Chinese stockpile, which has been largely depleted from their own industrial revolution last decade and this decade. The Chinese have had tremendous industrial growth and in the process have depleted most of their silver stockpile. I think as part of the what do you want to call it? A default that took place resulting in J.P. Morgan losing its headquarters as collateral. It took place in 2015. I believe the Chinese hired J.P. Morgan to help them to replace their stockpile. Okay, that's important. There's another event having to do with silver, and that is in the last 8 to 10 months, a tremendous amount of elite wealth has departed from paper assets like stocks and bonds and has moved to physical silver. I'm talking about over 1.4 billion ounces of silver is now in the hands of elites, Western elites. They know what's coming.
Jim, how do you know the avenues of acquisition? Was it contract, COMEX contracts, or was it certainly not? It was OTC, or
I don't know, and I'm going to be investigating that further in order to include that in the July newsletter, because here we are in July, and I'm gathering my notes. It's a long process to produce the monthly report. It takes a couple weeks of gathered notes and then a week of writing, and I gotta do my work, and that's what I do. But these are two big events. J.P. Morgan is accumulating silver, and so are the elite, who are getting out of stocks and bonds. So who's supporting the stock and bond market in the United States? It's the Fed and the Wall Street bank minions.
The exchange, stabilization fund, Jim?
Well, that too. I wouldn't be surprised if they're buying directly stocks. I mean, they got caught with the New York Fed as liaison a while back. But, it doesn't matter that they're violating charters. There's no law anymore. And that's a chief characteristic of a fascist state.
Do you know anything about the J.P. Morgan being granted the 10-year deal, like immunization against manipulation? So it was something after the acquisition of Bear Stearns. Add this to your research when you look into this stuff, because I'm looking at this article right here, and I remember hearing of this in the past, and this could play in absolutely into their acquisition reasons, because that 10 years is, has expiring or has just expired recently, if this holds true about a 10-year immunity, basically, for manipulating silver and gold.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised because, 10 years ago there were a number of new laws that came on the books. One that struck my interest was the big pharma immunity from liability on damage and death from vaccines.
Mm-hmm.
So this is all part and parcel of the fascist state. It's not a crime anymore. They can do whatever they want. They can kill through vaccines, and they're not liable.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone who wants to take vaccines and get a string of 30 or 50 for their babies, I think you're nuts.
It's beyond me. I get, and it's one that still boils my blood even years later.
I had 5 or 6 vaccines when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And I am healthy as a horse.
Me too. I was born in 1980, and I think we had the schedule then was maybe 10 or a dozen by the time you were 6 years old. Today, it's something like I don't have a schedule in front of me, but I swear to you, it's like 80 inoculations or administrations rather. You know, they pump 5 of them into one shot by 24 months, man. It's so freaking criminal, the level of... So I'll debate people about it all day long. I mean, it's...
I actually had a positive influence on a small group of mothers that I know here.
Good for
and,
you.
A couple of them are my friends.
You're saving kids by arguing this, for Christ's sake.
I told them, you don't need anything more than 5, 6, or 8, and stop there. You do not need an additional group after 1 year. You do not need an additional group of vaccines after 2 years.
No,
you do
most
not need
of them,
an additional group after 5 years.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a lot of research that says you don't need any vaccine.
No shit. My daughter is completely unvaccinated. My older son was only partially when he was little. Some of them were administered after we said no, and the bastards did it anyway. And he has some sensory developmental, roadblocks, challenges that I'm not sure are not entirely attributed to those fucking things.
But you can't sue them.
No, they're neurotoxins, for God's sakes. You're attacking the nervous system. And half of the stuff that they're inoculating for is completely unnecessary. Hepatitis B in the hospital at birth because it's a sexually transmitted disease. So unless your kid's going to be, you don't need a Hep B unless you're going to be, sharing needles or having, sexual...
Well, you never know. There might be some Clinton supporters in the...
Jesus, Jim.
The incubators.
Careful, that's what got us cut off on our... In fact, we should probably stop now so our recording here is solid and pick up on a part 2.
Oh, boy. Anyway, I think we're going to be seeing some rather interesting events coming up because there's a new phenomenon on the horizon, and that is Trump wants to... how shall I say, stir the pot a bit before the midterm elections in November. There's a lot of effort among, I just don't want to get into a whole lot of this. Honestly, I don't like politics, and it just gets people into trouble. But Trump wants to stir things up, and I think he's going to bring about a whole lot more criminal investigations in order to finish or accelerate the stirring of the pot, because all the publicity will be bad for the existing power centers, and it's going to get messy.
Well, and the rats scurry when the lights come on, or the cockroaches, whatever. So that's we're already seeing that as we see little lights flicker on here and there. We're seeing these bastards and their shenanigans, and they're exposing themselves even more. Right?
It's a matter of unsealed indictments. There's something like 24,000 of them now.
Gosh.
And they're sealed indictments. They're sealed indictments. There are about 3,000 or 3,300 that have been unsealed. And the way I look at it is there are people in positions of power. There are people in positions of wealth. So they're possibly going to be arrested. They're possibly going to see seizures of their wealth. And there's a lot of buzz that Trump is going to address the U.S. government debt, not annual deficit, it's going to be the debt, the cumulative debt. He's going to address that with some of these seizures, and I wish him luck.
Well,
I hear lots of different stories about, gold reserves that were stolen or being recovered. It's very difficult to confirm these things because the ones who did the thefts control the news.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And
yes.
that might sound like a psycho comment, but just take a look at all the major news networks that are continuing with the pro-Hillary and the Russian Trump dossier nonsense.
We have a president who communicates with the populace on Twitter, for God's sakes, while calling it all lying, manipulated news. Like, come on, guys. It's all lying, manipulated crap. All the news corporations are controlled by what? We don't even have to, follow the money. It's all the same friggin' people that are controlling what information is being released. So this debt shock, I just wrote down debt shock. I've toiled with this in my mind often, Jim. How in the hell are we going to go through this transition? Because I've been kind of waiting for it for a decade, right? Some of you guys have been talking about it for several decades. How all these people that were crying in the streets, and wearing the pink hats, and when their 401ks and when their bank accounts goes poof, when this whenever it finally does look like the transition itself, what in the heck is? And so the debt shock, the idea that maybe Trump might use the national debt and why it's, what did it double in Obama's term? Maybe there's a way to show the national populace, hey, this money, this is your treasury, this is your nation's wealth, has been squandered and it's been spent on wars and oh God, all these other things, right? And stolen.
Yeah, well, it's a book in itself of stolen wealth from the U.S. government. We like to tell the story that when the Soviet Union was in its final decade, there was a lot of internal theft. The same is happening in the United States. The two big sources of wealth that I'm trying to pay attention to are the stolen Fort Knox gold. It's like 8,700 tons of gold.
Is that the Yamashita?
I don't think that's a Yamashita. Yamashita dates way back.
Okay.
It dates pre-World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And it has Chinese origins. It's very complex. Let me just focus on Fort Knox gold, 8,700 tons of gold, apparently stolen by Bush and Clinton. Okay? And there are stories now that Trump has recovered it.
Oh, shit.
Okay, it's very hard to confirm these things.
What about the 9/11 gold, Jim? Wasn't the 9/11 the 9/11 2001 the largest gold heist in the history of the world?
Yes, but it was only $100 billion worth.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now that sounds like I shouldn't use the word only. It's about 20% of what Fort Knox was worth.
Okay, so not the largest.
So it's 1/5 of Fort Knox. Okay, that also is being searched for. But I'm looking at the big items.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also trying to follow as best I can, and it's very hard. Ron Paul did a great job forcing an independent audit of the Fed in 2008, where they determined that the Fed owners, the board members, treated themselves to $23 trillion in near 0% loans.
Good Lord.
So at that time, I concluded, okay, they're going to force a ruin of the system, and these guys are going to buy it all up.
Uh-huh.
Okay, now there's a concerted effort to hunt it down, to freeze it, to arrest the mid-level people, and to force something at the higher level. Okay, there are other stolen gold hoards, and I just don't want to get into it all because I'm not an expert. I get bits and pieces, and I don't want to sound like I really have, assurances that
Sure.
all my information is dead on correct. But Fort Knox was stolen, and they took the Everhart refinery in Canada, bought it up, operated it 24/7, 365 days a year. And I had a very smart client say to me a couple of weeks ago, Jim, you're using the word gold plating improperly. You cannot use electrolytic processes to put gold on top of tungsten. What they did was they took gold bars. And a little known fact was next to this Northwest Canadian refinery was a huge tungsten mine. That's why they selected that. I don't think the name is exactly Everhart, but it's very close to the name of Everhart. And I should really put it down and write it on my wall. But it's a name very similar to Everhart Refinery, very close to a tungsten mine. And what they did was they produced about 1.3 million bars.
Holy cow.
Of tungsten with, as this engineer told me, it's a gold clad, not a gold plating. Gold clad. Think of it as a shoe, a gold shoe over a tungsten bar, as opposed to gold plating, which would, stick at a, molecular level. Okay. And they used the Panama, Arkansas narcotics connection to ship out the fake gold bars. They call them salted gold bar. They're tungsten bars with gold cladding. And the biggest victim was Hong Kong banks. There are other victims in New York City and in France, in Germany. Those banks, not necessarily banks in New York, more like jewelers in New York. You don't victimize New York bankers when the New York bankers are involved in the crime. So now what you see, Will, is the Hong Kong reparation. Hong Kong cut a deal, I think, with the United States government that they would not publicize, and this works both in favor of U.S. and in favor of Hong Kong. They did not publicize the crime scene of perhaps thousands of gold bars being shipped, fake gold bars, to Hong Kong banks. And the reparation is coming in the form of, you see it in the Department of Commerce. Every quarter, there is a category called Industrial Metals and Supplies. And it sticks out like a giant purple thumb. It's like 2 billion, 3 billion every report. And where's it going? Hong Kong. What's Hong Kong doing buying industrial metals and supplies? What is that all about? Restitution for a crime. And why would Hong Kong not want to publicize it? Because it might weaken their entire banking system and their currency and their economy and the savings of their individuals and all their corporate functions. Wow.
Holy wow. Double wows.
Wow.
But what do we say, Jim? Shit's getting real. I think
that's what you like to say.
Yeah, I said it to you years ago, and it just keeps getting real.
Yeah, you keep saying it, and it keeps making me laugh. We're getting. I asked a couple of my best colleagues, if this is a 9-inning game, what inning are we in? And 13. I got half and half for the answer. What'd you say?
13.
Half of them said the 8th inning, and half of them said the 9th inning.
Oh man.
I remember a year ago I was saying this is the 7th inning.
It's a long-ass baseball game.
Well, it's a long baseball game, but, baseball is not a clock.
Well said.
Football, soccer, basketball, they're all a clock.
Interesting. Well said.
I mean, you've got some long games in baseball. Now, when I was a kid, we used to think, well, gosh, how many strikeouts can you have in a single inning? There's no limit, Will.
Right.
I saw a pass ball last night, a wild pitch. The guy struck out. It was a bad pitch in the dirt, a curveball, and it went to the backstop. He went to first base. So he had an out recorded on his personal percentages. The pitcher recorded an out. And it turns out to be an extra out that inning. The guy's on first base. You could keep on doing it. Baseball goes on and on. Not like cricket, but it goes on and on. So you get delays. I mean, there was a reset that was agreed upon in January of 2014. The United States signed it. Obama signed it. But we decided, no, let's break it because we're the exceptional nation. Let's engineer a coup in Ukraine and blame it on Russia. It's just one delay after another. And now we've got a president who doesn't want the delay. And, one of the signs that things are really getting nasty and toward the breakdown that's inevitable is we got this guy named Powell as the Federal Reserve chairman. And, I don't know anything about him. Okay, he's a professional in finance. Maybe he was a fund manager. Maybe he worked for a year in Wall Street till he hated their guts. Okay, who is this guy? Okay, he's not a Bernanke type. He's not a Yellen type. He's not an insider from the New York Fed. I don't think he has dinner ever with Dudley of the New York Fed. Okay, who is this guy? He's the fall guy.
Yep, no kidding. I always thought you'd put crazy, nutty old Janet as the fall gal.
She wasn't crazy. She was the only one who warned Dudley and Greenspan. And Greenspan in 2005. She warned them and said, this is not going to go well. Don't do this. Let the recession happen. Let the derivatives fall where they may. And
let it bust.
They said to her, shut up. We got more paper mache to do. They didn't fix anything in 08 and 09. I forecasted that we would go to 0%. I got into an argument with a very well-respected German client, a corporate executive. He said, no, the Euro Central Bank will never go to 0%. They'll never go down to 1%. And I said, they will when your euro is 150, because that's a consequence if you don't go down to zero when the United States Fed is going to zero.
Yep.
You can't have a high percentage rate in Europe and expect the euro not to go up. So they did. And then I thought, okay, the next thing we're going to see is QE Japanese style. Of course, I get the idiot. Oh, by the way, I'm getting more hate mail. In just the last 2 months, I've probably gotten about 6 or 8. I had really almost none for a full year. July 4th, let's celebrate Independence Day. Don't come back to your effing country. You're not welcome here anymore, you traitor. Okay,
wow.
That was an email just 2 days ago. Okay, lovely stuff with a false name that usually has, golly, a very strong resemblance to Israeli names. I just can't figure that out. So the shit's getting real, and we are seeing a lot of events. I'm focusing on the non-dollar platforms because that's where the dollar gets not necessarily derailed. The dollar loses its monopoly power. Like I'm reading more and more about banking reserves. The dollar is going down for banking reserve, but it's still a high figure. The monopoly is losing its effect. It's no longer 80% like it was 25 years ago. It's more like 61, and next month's 59, and next year is 59. Okay, it's going down. I'm looking for the day when the dollar is less than 50% of global bank reserves. I think it already is, but they're lying. They're lying about that just like they lie about their gold reserves. Okay, the other big figure is trade payment, dollar-denominated trade payment. That's still very strong, the dollar. But when the gold trade note comes into play, look for something different. Look for an alternative. And, you might get a very big surprising boost from an unexpected corner called Basel, Switzerland. They might try to do something dumb, from clumsy, arrogant bully tactics to bring about some kind of a fake gold-backed SDR that does not fly anywhere.
Of course.
And they will open the gold window.
Jim, this is so those of us that are studying the intricacies of this, know how asinine something like this would be. But this parallels perfectly in a lot of what's recently come to light in how these elites, okay, how incredibly removed they are psychologically from not only are they satanic nut jobs, the majority of them, but they live in this massive bubble, and it's such an incredible bubble to where they literally are a disconnect with not only their constituents' reality but actual true reality. And I feel like this is part of it. We're going to see more of this, just absolute insanity. Hail Marys coming from these people.
I'd love to know, for all these nut jobs who are running things in Washington, if they're very wealthy, what are they doing with their private wealth? Mm-hmm. And they're not going to tell you anything about it because they're continuing to build up the impression that the U.S. economy is strong and the dollar is strong. I think we're about to see the last phase of the dollar rise because so many other nations are seeing very harsh problems. And as they have a harsh problem, they cannot print money to support their currency. And the currencies are supported by buying bonds, the sovereign debt. And Italy can't do that. Turkey can't do that. Venezuela can't do that. Iran can't do that. But Iran and some of the other countries can climb onto the gold wagon and fortify their system, their banking system, with gold platforms.
Do you think we might see something similar, Jim, on the silver side from certain nations like, I don't know, Mexico, Peru, monster silver producers?
I once thought that Mexico might launch the silver standard, but I gotta tell you my more current thoughts of Mexico. Mm-hmm. And I included something in the June report about Mexico because they're about to make a very big mistake, inaugurating a socialist president who wants to do a tremendous amount of corporate takeovers. Their currency is going to hell. Mm. The report card, the vote, the global vote is done in the form of their currency. And, you don't go to Switzerland and London in order to become a Mexican peso trader.
Right.
It's a very limited market, and it's dominated by U.S.-Mexican balance of trade and settling. Mm-hmm. It's in the neighborhood of 21 now. I remember when I went to Cancun.
20, yeah.
Yeah, back in, I think it was about 2013. It was about 11.
Yeah, I go often, and I've just been watching it here the last 24 months, just climb from 16, 17 up to 20 right now.
I think it's going to go to about 24. I've got a really good contact in Mexico who goes back and forth Texas to Mexico. Mm-hmm. And he's very sharp. And he said, Jim, it's near 21 now, and it's already in the crisis area, but it's going to go to 24 because a lot of things are starting to happen in Mexico. And let me get to the crunch line. Coca-Cola and Pepsi just abandoned one particular state of Mexico because they're being threatened with extortion. Mm. So there's going to be much less in central Mexico for Coke and Pepsi cold beverages. Mm. That's just a symbol. That's just a sign of what's to come. Hmm. Now, at the same time, still, major producer, they might still be number one in silver output is Mexico.
Right.
So despite the calls, like for Hugo Salinas Price and a few others, they're saying we should go to, if not a currency standard, then a national saving standard, where banks permit the Libertad coin, the silver coin, it stands for liberty, Libertad coin. People can save Libertad coins, not used in circulation, not to replace their peso, not to threaten their system, but to just integrate in the savings system so that people can actually benefit from the transition toward a legitimate currency during a crisis time.
Is this
like now?
Is this what Hugo? So I formally, previously in hearing about his desire to involve silver in the currency, thought awesome. After recently have heard some connections that he may have to some nasty pedo trafficking rings. I don't know. I don't know the truth behind that, but if so, then this could be a scheme just to take all the damn people's savings and, oh yes, store your silver in our bank. Let's do that. It's a great idea.
I'm not sure that would even work. You bring up a good point. I think the people would want it. Maybe they would buy their coins at the bank, but not keep them in the bank.
Mm-hmm.
And then they'd be subject to, robberies from the most filthy person in the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
This is just very, very messy. My point is that they might move toward a silver standard in some form, but they also might suffer a rather significant decline in silver output from the global major called Mexico. At the same time, if they're not number one, Russia is, and I don't think Russia is exporting their silver or gold. So maybe they're exporting some silver, for industrial interests in Germany or whatever. By the way, I got to say something. I forgot to mention a point I had on the tip of my tongue, but we got carried away with other things. The Germans are evading the Russian sanctions, and they have been for 2 years, by setting up subsidiaries of German companies inside Russia. And they're buying up a plant that's abandoned, not doing too much, or low production. They did buy it up, and they retool it quickly, in 4 to 6 months, and they start producing, say, Mercedes-Benz. Okay, and that way the Russian output from a German subsidiary can legally be sold to a Russian customer without violation.
Genius.
So the sanctions have had a backfire of massive foreign direct investment in Russia.
Wow, that's unbelievable.
And then at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, which is actually an economic forum, unlike Davos, which is a big banker barbecue, where, open bar and
probably some late night parties with, horned goats. Sorry.
Yeah, let's not go there. But in Davos Economic Forum, if there are more than 3 corporate heads there, I'd be amazed. In the Economic Forum at St. Petersburg, if there are less than 200 corporate heads, I'd be amazed.
Yeah.
Okay, France signed numerous deals worth $23 billion with Russian interests, in direct violation of the Russian sanctions issued by Brussels. The Germans did something similar, but not as big as France. France signed a lot of deals with Russia. Germany, as in defiance, continued with the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline for provision of their second pipeline to German industry from Russia. Okay, we're already seeing now the trend, and it's the industrial center of Europe moving toward Russia, which means they're going to be embracing the Eurasian trade zone. And I say, watch Frankfurt for becoming an RMB trading hub with respect to China. Now, for instance, China will say, okay, we'll permit the usage of Italian government bonds being issued in Frankfurt in RMB terms. We'll permit the issuance of Spanish government bonds being issued in RMB terms. And yes, China will be a bidder. There's no currency risk for a Chinese entity to bid on Spanish or Italian government bonds that are denominated in their own currency.
Right. Man, de-dollarization on all fronts.
And this could happen in Frankfurt, Germany, which is competing with London as the RMB Chinese hub. This is very big. Frankfurt, Germany,
Go
yes.
Germans.
Well, you may not know it, but one of the leading importers of industrial anything in China is Germany. It's not just cars. It's cranes. It's construction equipment.
Sure.
It's cement dumpers that go up to the 7th floor.
All the pick and shovel stuff. All of it.
Pick and shovel, yeah. Backhoes, you name it. I noticed that in Costa Rica here, when I see a construction site, I look to see
German equipment.
what is the name on the equipment, like the crane.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a German name, Liebherr.
Yep.
And I looked at other ones, and I said, oh, look at that. There's Volvo on that. It's like an earth mover. You know, a big scooper thing. Volvo. Okay, so Volvo, and I see Komatsu, but I see German names more than the others.
Ich lieben Deutschland. What's happening with our friend Merkel? They're kicking her ass out over there. You're studying that pretty closely, are you not?
I'm studying it a little bit, but it looks like she made a concession in order to keep the coalition together, but all she ended up doing was buying a little time so that she could be exposed as the liar as she is.
I saw approval ratings, something recently, and the statistics were alarming, how the level of disapproval by German nationals in the country.
But, you know, German nationals don't have control of the German government.
Mm-hmm.
They have control of their parliament, but the parliament, unfortunately, doesn't have a lot of power.
Bends over to the euro.
Well, you know, too much power in the chancellor's office and too many dictums coming from Brussels.
Mm.
They want to get rid of the Russian sanctions, but the parliament's opinion does not matter.
Right.
So they're left with bickering over a lot of things, including the immigration. It looks like immigration with the Arab human garbage. The immigration issue is going to be her downfall.
Well, I mean, I've met people personally, Swedes, Finnish, Germans, who are really furious with, having their. I mean, it's an epidemic. From what I understand.
Oh gosh, I've got this one client in Italy. I don't want to mention her name. She's an older lady, and she's been supplying me information. It seems like every 4 to 6 months she sends me a nice one-page letter on what's going on in my country and how it's being ruined. She said she knows a couple of people who have been fined, very serious $1,000 fines, €1,000 fines, for speaking out against the Arab immigration policy. She knows one small hotel owner who had her entire hotel taken over by the government and given a lousy eminent domain price so that it could house the Arab human garbage.
Wow.
And there are lots of people who speak out against the movement, and they're given fines. And some of them, she says, lose their jobs. And she said in the most recent, which is about April or March, she said, I have a number of friends and they don't like going outside anymore because they get followed by 4 or 5 young Arab kids who steal from them.
This is not going to last. People are not going to put up with that shit very much longer. I mean, you're going to have pitchforks at some point. You just are. There's a breaking point.
I thought 2 years ago.
Yeah.
I thought a year ago along your lines, but it just continues.
Yeah, it's unreal.
I got a word from my source Cato with U.S. intelligence organization contacts that 2 years ago Sweden rounded up just the vagrants, Arab human garbage vagrants, ones without a job, ones living, in a tent, ones who are just squatting at the doorway of a restaurant, stuff like that. They rounded up 30,000 of them and dumped them on the North African coast. I said, gosh, I'm surprised they didn't dump them 20 miles off the coast of water. And he said, well, they were sufficiently humane that they wanted them to have at least a chance. So they dumped them on. I said, what are you talking about? Tunisia, Libya? And he said, yeah, Egypt. I said, not Syria. He said, no, it's a war zone.
Jeez.
And now it's becoming quite clear that they're not really from Syria. They're from all over. And some are coming from Afghanistan.
Soros is just NGOs are just rounding them up all over and shipping them in those boats that we've talked about, huh?
And they're getting falsified passports. I think we might see part of the movement prove the validity of your passport, or you go back, and we don't even care where you go back. We're going to just dump you on a shore. And we're talking about, what is it? Is it something like 5 million in Germany alone? I mean, I don't know the numbers. These are very big, scary numbers.
Yeah. How are they
Italy's
not?
got
How are they not
Italy has the
tracking the
biggest problem.
shipping? I mean, who's shipping them in? Like, but again, you've just
It's
got.
the NGOs.
Uh-huh,
2 years ago, I had a direct question to a good source. If they're shipping them in and they're poor, who's paying for it?
Yeah, Soros.
And the answer all came back the same. Soros NGOs.
Non-government organizations. Yeah, yeah. Many of them are, oh gosh, charities set up as nonprofit organizations.
Well, they present themselves as charity, but what they're really doing is they're political disruption organizations,
Mm-hmm.
like Black Lives Matter.
Mm-hmm.
I love telling this. Stop me if I'm repeating. When the Black Lives Matter was really catching a lot of flack back in 2016 and early 17, I got an email from a client, and it was two dogs. One was a yellow Labrador and one was a black Labrador. And the black Labrador had a sign around its neck. The dog said, "Black Labs Matter." So
It's quite true, isn't it? Black Labs
Black
matter.
Labs do matter.
They do.
They don't even know they're black. They're really. I had a dog once who was half Black Lab and half Border Collie Scottish, and he was so much fun. But he went away. But,
To heaven, where they all go. All dogs.
You know, we're in an exciting time here. I don't care whether we're in the ninth inning or the eighth inning. We're in a very late stage of this, and the voice told me very clear terms 8 months ago, we have begun the reset. And, you know, it was just a couple months later that you started hearing, my gosh, the Fed is actually tightening. The Fed is actually reducing their balance sheet. Now, they're not talking about reduction of interference with the derivatives.
Right.
They're talking about reducing their balance sheet of mortgage bonds and treasury bonds. And I think it was mainly so that the Department of Treasury can scoop them up with their, computer machinery. I don't think they're getting dumped because you still have hundreds of billions of dollars worth of treasury bonds being dumped by foreign central banks.
Right.
And you've got clever usage of treasury bonds, like building the Russian pipeline for China, like also the Chinese supplying credit to the nation of Angola in the form of treasury bonds. Very clever maneuvers. So there's a lot of usage of treasury bonds for purchasing and paying for things. And it's called indirect exchange because it's got a third party.
Uh-huh.
There's no American in the room, like when China pays for Russian construction of a pipeline. There's no American in the room. So it's third party. And there's a lot of that going on. I think the Chinese built the entire Djibouti East African port with treasury bonds.
It's the U.S. way, man.
Well, it's considered money, and now the voice mentioned something 3 weeks ago. He said, "Jim, this is fascinating. Remember the story where the Russians dumped $48 billion in a single scoop of treasury bonds?"
And then the demand came out of Liechtenstein or something.
Yeah, well, I don't know exactly where it took place, but the voice said, "Let me put some details on that." And I'm pretty sure about this description, but it's very hard to confirm. He said deposits were made in European banks of that $47 billion in treasury bonds. And with those deposits, I did not say sales. The news said sales. The news rarely tells the truth. There's very little truth in the news, and there's very little news in the truth. Very little truth in the news. Okay, sorry, I butchered that. But the Russians deposited treasury bonds in West European banks and borrowed perhaps more than the deposit. Let's just say that they borrowed one-on-one, okay, and bought gold bullion with it. They just bought $40 billion worth of gold bullion with treasury bonds without selling the treasury bonds. And as he put it, they don't have to worry about the interest payments because they are coupon-bearing
Oh
bonds.
my God! Come on, you know they levered it up at least 5-1.
Well, maybe, but maybe at first they just did one-on-one, see
Test
how it
the
goes,
waters.
and then, a month they'll do it again, and a month they'll do it again. The Chinese did that with Wells Fargo, depositing treasury bonds. They borrowed 10-1 to buy up commercial urban U.S. buildings. 10-1. So the Russians, they might go to 3-1 or 5-1. Who knows? I don't really care. But look at it this way. If they go over 1 on the ratio, they're going to have to come up with cash if they ever dump them. So go 1-on-1 and dump the bonds slowly over time. Like with a deal, Trump and Putin. We're not going to disrupt your bond market, but we're going to borrow against our bonds. Okay? That would be a constructive maneuver by Putin not to disrupt the U.S. Treasury bond market. China, I think, is not quite so cooperative.
Are you hearing anything on the government stage level, rather, of blockchain being implemented in some way, shape, or form in current new currency schemes, whatever they may be?
I'm only hearing about Venezuela and Russia and nowhere else. But I think blockchain is going to be an important feature in a lot of systems. I'm just not an expert in that, but I do have a couple experts in my jackass team.
A couple of jackasses. We talked briefly before the call and talked about the tokenized economy, what I call it, I guess, or what many call it. This idea of companies that are operating on a blockchain, and they're operating with a token that serves as a utility in the form of operation in the company, and it's also a form of investment into the company, much like the traditional stock or share of equity in a company, only different. And we both talked about how we think, you mentioned one company, Populous, who's involved in the invoicing and factoring side, which I think has a lot of potential. A lot of these companies were just raising money a year ago, and now they're past beta, in beta, and they have workable products, and it's kind of exciting to see. And so I know you're not an expert on the subject, but I know that you know a lot of people, a lot of experts on a lot of subjects. So I'm just curious if you hear anything, what your take is on the tokenized economy, or on the role, as you see, this new currency standard or currency standards developing as the dollar paradigm dies, what role blockchain might have in it.
I think it's going to have a very big role in a certain sense. And as my one colleague puts it, he said it's going to be disintermediating the bank financial services function. Okay, that's a nice zip word way of saying it's going to screw the big banks for their service income. They're not. For instance, let me give you a couple examples. There might be a big construction loan of $2 billion for a port facility project. And instead of raising the cash through a Wall Street bank with a 6% fee,
right,
it's not intermediated that way. It's done instead on the blockchain, and it's done for, something like 1/10 of 1%.
Or in another example, a company raising equity could do so on the blockchain without going through the U.S. securities licensing, all of that incredible process and fee structure, and partnering with a broker dealer, everything that has to take place there. You eliminate a lot of administrative, a lot of legal, and a lot of financial
Right.
middlemen in that process.
Okay, you're talking about a formalized stock. I wanted to bring up an example of something that was not formalized into a security like stock or bond. A loan for construction of a port facility. Now, continue that vein. Imagine a company wants to engage in a very big project of a similar nature, maybe not a port facility, maybe plant and equipment to build Chinese cars on U.S. soil. And that corporate bond could be done with the blockchain. And again, J.P. Morgan and Bank of America and Citigroup would not be involved because it would be done on the blockchain. It would not be done at a 6% fee. It would be done at a 1/10 of 1% fee.
While
Okay,
cutting legal too.
Continue in that vein, like your example, various companies wanting to issue stock. And, we're talking about peer-to-peer transactions here. We're not talking about sending your money to the Wall Street bank where they hold it and eventually dispense it unless they steal part of it.
Well, that's just it. Did I lose you?
Now,
No.
I've also been told by my crypto expert on my Jackass team that this argument about, well, look at all the electricity usage that will be gobbled up and wasted just improving accounts on the blockchain and verifying steps on a repeated basis and all the you hear stories about, well, the blockchain verification used up the equivalent of Denmark's entire annual electricity bill. Okay, he said, Jim, this is a spurious argument to denigrate the whole blockchain technology.
Right.
And
thank you for
I take him at his
sharing
word
that.
because he's got a lot of time to research this. And he said, Jim, I'll do the research and we'll just meet for lunch.
I'd love to pose a few questions for you to take to him. Maybe we cover in our next interview if you're open to something like that.
Sure.
That'd be rad. That'd be what we youngsters call rad.
That'd be wicked cool. That's what we Boston youngsters say.
Jim, man, I missed you, bro. It's been a freaking half a year probably since I've had you on, or at least 4 or 5 months. So I've missed you.
I think it's been 6 or 7 months, Will.
Golly, I'm sorry for that, man. Well, I'm, I promise to have you back on at least every few months. As things get crazier, maybe even once a month. I mean, I imagine I'm going to have to be covering events at a more increasing pace as things get even wilder. So, as people are thirsting for data on what the hell's going on, what's unfolding, where's it going, how do I protect my assets?
You got to sell your stocks and bonds. You got to get out of paper assets. Look at it this way, very simply. Who's supporting stocks and bonds right now but the Fed and the Wall Street banks?
Criminals. Yep.
Okay, that support is artificial. It's not legitimate. It's not value-based. So enjoy their ridiculously high price. And who's keeping down the gold and silver price but the same people? So sell what they're supporting and buy what they're suppressing.
Yeah, the silver at $16 is just, when you really understand and study the fundamentals, it is quite laughable. I mean, it's hundreds of years. It's a long time worth of manipulation and suppression that goes into it, and a lot of other market fundamentals. But to your point, the fact that we've got smart money getting out of phantom assets and into large amounts of silver bullion, obviously only at a pace that's allowable because of the limited supply, frankly.
Well, you've also got shortages of silver.
Absolutely. If you were buying silver 2 summers ago, I think it was 2 years ago in the summertime when the price dipped back down into $14.50 or under $15 territory, and we had a like 80-cent drop. I remember we used to have $4 and $5 drops, but it had, like, at the time, which was a significant drop, like about $1 drop. And damned if supplies didn't I thought it was over 2 summers ago. Premiums on silver eagles jumped. I mean, it always starts with the eagles. They jumped up to $5 and $6 and $8, and then you couldn't even get eagles for months. And then it went to bars and rounds. Once it got into the bars and rounds, I said, oh boy, this is it. But it recovered, they caught back up. But it's so tight.
Well, they took silver from the dumbasses who invest in the SLV fund.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what it's for.
All those dollars going in there are being used to short silver.
A warehouse for enduring and continuing and perpetuating the price decline.
Yeah, I think the prospectus it actually says verbatim, we'll take your dollars and not necessarily buy bullion. We might actually use it to short silver on the COMEX. Oh, man. Yeah, it's probably the investment of a lifetime. And at some point when gold breaks out, and silver follows, it's gonna be a ride.
Gold has to break down the doors so the silver horse can run through.
I like that. I like that analogy.
Well, you need power with gold. Mm-hmm. Gold has got the multi-billion-dollar power. That can knock down the walls, knock down the big fences, knock down the fortified gates. But, once it's open, look out. That's where silver can take off. Pardon me.
Well, Jim, your work has been just an amazing resource for years and years and years. Your hat trick letter is monthly still, or you have 2 reports, a bi-monthly report? What's your report presently?
Right now, it's one longer single report.
Gotcha. And it's probably, 50, 60 some odd pages?
It's 50 pages, give or take. Mm-hmm. This past month was a little more because I just had a really cool section on the global elite and how they're falling apart. Mm-hmm. They're on the run, and it means that change is in the wind. So what I'm trying to do now is, if there's a standalone topic that I can make an 8 or 12 page report on, fine. But I have principally one report. It's the Global Gold Reset Report, and it's we're up to number 171 for monthly issues. I remember when I visited Kurt Rickenbacker in Cannes, France, on the Riviera in August of 2003. He said, Jim, I have 238 monthly reports. And I said, wow, that's amazing. I wonder what that would be like. Maybe I'll start a newsletter myself. And here I am, and it's now in the 15th year.
That's incredible.
So it's been a labor of love, but Golden Jackass website. There's a free section of interviews and public articles for promotion purposes. But I invite people to go on, and I love mentioning my favorite compliments, and as I do, I get people responding to me about, here Jim's another compliment. Okay, my favorite compliments are, I left the newsletter for a couple of years, and now I'm back. I wish I had not left. Mm-hmm. The other is, I've been listening to your free podcast thinking that's sufficient, but out of curiosity, a year ago I signed up for your newsletter. I wish I had long ago. And another compliment came, and this happened 3 times in 1 week in June. I canceled your newsletter just out of being a little bit disappointed with everything, being a little down in the dumps personally. My own business is, suffering not big losses, but it's just not like it was a couple of years ago. And I thought, let me cut costs. And I realized I cannot do without your newsletter. I'm back.
It's incredibly in depth. It takes, it's a great, whenever you've got that long afternoon read or break it up, it's so in depth though, and it gives you a great sense of what's going on and where things are headed from a larger 30,000 foot overview, global geopolitical type of perspective, and Jim has been right on over the years, so the work is valuable. It's quite valuable. So thanks for what you do, buddy.
Well, it's a pleasure. I wish it were a complete pleasure, but I've got what I consider some rather subtle and weird attacks going on.
Yeah, you
And,
certainly do. I've done a lot of these interviews over the last 7 years, and never had my call recorder do what it did this morning. We lost a half hour of great content, but
Not the second time it's happened in the last month, but what I'm referring to is a string of events. I'll be very brief here. A string of events that convinces me that some very evil powers are, focusing their attention on me because I started talking about their pedophilia and their child murder sacrifices 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. That's when some problems started. Mm-hmm. But in a short period of time, a woman I know almost died from an infection. A tree fell on a property. A client owing money was killed in a car wreck. And 2 other things. A septic tank exploded and wrecked the neighbor's property. Okay, this all in a short span of time. And, I think like a statistician. Mm-hmm. One of these in a year I can understand, but 4 of them in an 18-month period?
No way.
That's like 3 standard errors above the mean.
That shit ain't normal, people, is what he means.
Infection is bacteria. That's something that Lucifer loves. Mm-hmm. A tree falling on a house. That's just something that he might laugh at. Being killed in a car wreck when owing money in accounts receivable, that's something that, it smells like the old boy down under, Mm-hmm. It's just too much. It's too much. Yeah. So that's why I've been appealing for Christian prayer warriors, and I've gotten an unbelievable response, and I'm glad and grateful for it.
Awesome.
And I don't want to get into too many details, but I did add on Contact Us, and I'm looking at one right now from a fellow named Kyle during this interview, and the category for customer service is personal support, emotional, spiritual. I've added this so they don't put on, they don't respond to, say, public article to share, mm-hmm. article to share, or login problem, and it's really emotional support. Or my least favorite, cancellation. And it turns out to be emotional support. Well, don't click on that, you nitwit. So now they're clicking on personal support, emotional, spiritual. I'm not kidding. 2 weeks ago, when I put that on, there were 30 a day.
Man, that's freaking awesome, Jim. And even for a guy with your mouth, to have a lot of Christian support says a hell of a lot alone, quite frankly.
Well, I'm rather liberal with my criticism, but I'm not liberal with my vulgarity.
Right.
And I do use shit once in a while, and I
also
talk
take
about
one every couple times a day.
I have insinuations of a wayward manner. But I tell you, there are a couple Christian people that I've communicated with directly, and they say, for a guy who's a little bit off the beaten path for the straight and narrow, Jim, you're very entertaining and you're charming, even though you're not, really pure. That's okay, you're charming. Mm-hmm. I said, well, that's fine. Thanks a bunch. Mm-hmm. I even got a couple people send me money. I mean, it's just amazing.
That's awesome.
Western Union, unbelievable.
Unreal.
So I have taken a couple financial losses, but I shouldn't really talk more about it.
Well,
things are turning around, and I'm glad of it. And I think The Voice nailed it by saying in the next couple months, the next few months, we're going to see some rather significant disruptive events, and it's going to be very good for releasing gold and silver. Mm-hmm. They're not going to be able to hold it back anymore. I mean, I got one graph showed 220 claims per gold ounce, but I saw another graph, probably a more liberal definition, saying it's over 500.
Holy cow.
What would happen if you had 10 people claiming the title of your house, Will?
Oh, man. I had no idea it was that up to 500 to 1.
It's between 200 and 540.
Jeez. That's absurd. I mean, 10 to 1 would be catastrophic.
Well, it was 100 to 1 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's just getting worse. I'd love to know what the definition is for their ratio. I believe the 228 to 1 that I saw a few days ago, I think that's COMEX alone. Now, the 500 might be COMEX, OTC, and London, LBMA, all that rolled into one. I don't know. Hard to know.
Yeah, when it breaks, it's going to break. I mean, it is going to break, you know.
It's going to break in a big way, and it's going to make that 2011 event where we went from, what was it, 17 to 50?
Yeah, over a four-month period, yeah.
I think we got that coming and more. I think we got a sequence of them.
Mm-hmm.
So sell your stock and bonds, be patient, buy up gold, silver, bars, and coins, and be patient. Don't use debt. I had one guy complain to me a year ago. It got me quite angry. He said, Jim, I took your suggestion and I put my entire life savings into silver.
Oh, jeez.
And my business went down, and now I have to sell it at a loss. I said, I never suggested you put your entire savings.
No.
If you had asked me, I would have said put a third in.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like when people accuse me of being responsible for their interpretations of what I have urged.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I had the same thing happen with my brother in '99. I don't want to get any details on that. He did not do as I suggested.
Just put it that way. Well, you know, going all in on anything is never really a good idea, you know, unless you're...
You got no leeway. None at all.
Yeah, unless you're, 20 years old at the beginning of your career, you've got high income and you can take the risk and, you're crazy.
But income is not secure anymore. High income
You're
doesn't
right.
matter.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
The biggest impact comes with high income people who have big cost structures and they lose their job.
Yeah. And with what's coming, who knows what income sources are still going to exist anymore. Good points.
I know. I'm actually thinking about other income sources, and it's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I think about a second newsletter, Will, The Adventures of Johnny Walker. It's not financial.
Mm-hmm.
Travel.
Yeah.
Cultural.
It's a great
beaches.
idea. It's a great idea, Jim.
Well, I'm thinking about it because, take a look at Jim, Willie, and Johnny Walker. They share the same initials.
They sure do, and I'm looking at a picture here on Skype of an older gentleman that just looks just like you, old Benny boy, and he and old JW have a little resemblance as well, I might add.
Well, they got the slogan. I got to be careful if it is Johnny Walker because they got their copyrights, they got all the trademark
yes.
protection, and I can spell Johnny Walker in a different way, but I definitely cannot say just keep walking.
Just keep stumbling. How about that?
What I might say is
sigue andando.
Keep on trucking.
Ooh, there you go. Nice.
We got to appeal to the marijuana crowd,
Yeah, you could have a little Grateful Dead bear, logo doing the trucking dance. Oh, Jim, I miss you, man. I'm gonna we'll have you on in a couple of months again, unless something breaks and there's a bank on fire in a few weeks. We'll do we'll do an emergency one. But we'll have links to your great website, goldenjackass.com, and your hat trick letter where people can check that out. But he's got a ton of free stuff too. Check it out. Jim's been a great resource for the community for a long time. So we thank you, my friend. Thanks for your time. Go enjoy some lunch and a bike ride, and let's chat again soon.
Okay, very good, Will. Thanks for having me on. We covered a lot of good ground.
Yes, sir. Always a pleasure.
I think for 99% of the time we stayed safe areas.
I think we're safe. We haven't been cut off yet, so we're still safe.
Okay. All right. Very good. Thanks for everything.
Cheers, buddy. Thanks. Bye-bye.